Chapter 3089 _ There existed 3 ranks of lineage crystals in God's domain: the normal lineage crystal, the higher-ranking advanced lineage crystal, and the highest-ranking primal lineage crystal. There existed 3 ranks of lineage crystals in God's domain: the normal lineage crystal, the higher-ranking advanced lineage crystal, and the highest-ranking primal lineage crystal. Primal lineage crystals were the only means for players to convert into a primal life form. However, primal lineage crystals were so rare that their rarity surpassed even legendary items. To put it into perspective, a typical God's domain would only have around a dozen primal life forms. In terms of life rating, primal life forms did not exceed higher life forms such as demi-dragons by much. Some primal life forms were even inferior to demi-dragons when it came to life rating. However, there was one aspect in which primal life forms had an insurmountable advantage over the higher life forms: world affinity. Among the many creatures in God's domain, primal life forms started with the highest world affinity. In God's domain, it was widely known that the higher a player's world affinity was, the higher their affinity with mana would be. At the same time, they would also have an easier time perceiving the operating principles of mana. If the average player started with 1 point in world affinity, a primal life form would start with 3 points in world affinity. Even players who had reached level 1 world authority wouldn't have such high world affinity. Most importantly, the world affinity gained through converting to a primal life form stacked with the world affinity players gained through world authority. Moreover, the world affinity gained this way wouldn't disappear even if players left the God's domain they came from. This was because it wasn't a blessing granted to them by their homeworld but rather an inherent part of their strength instead. Of course, converting to a primal life form wasn't an easy task. Aside from requiring a primal lineage crystal, one would also need 10,000 mana stones to activate the primal lineage crystal. Mana stones were much rarer than magic crystals. Although master alchemists could synthesize mana stones using magic crystals, the conversion ratio was 1 to 100. Moreover, the synthesis success rate wasn't 100%. In other words, it had cost at least 1 million magic crystals to convert to a primal life form. It simply wasn't a cost the average person could afford. This saves me a lot of trouble, Shifeng thought as he put the primal lineage crystal into his bag. Originally, Shifeng had planned on using an advanced lineage crystal to increase his life rating. Then, he would head to the main continent and pick up an inferior legendary quest to increase his world authority in preparation for his Tier 5 promotion. Not all Tier 6 God-ranked experts were equals. In fact, the difference in strength between God-ranked experts was much greater than even the difference between Tier 3 and Tier 4 players. If he did not pave a solid foundation for himself, even if he reached Tier 6, he would merely be an insignificant Tier 6 God-ranked expert in his subworld and the greater God's domain. Shifeng might seem very strong right now, but that was only because of a few factors, namely the Winter of Eternal Night, his legendary mana body, and his superb control over mana. In the Winter of Eternal Night's case, it was a fragmented legendary weapon that closely rivaled legendary weapons. In the case of his mana control, he was confident that nobody could match him in this regard at Tier 3. Even if the Tier 6 God-ranked experts on the main continent reverted to Tier 3, none of them could match him. However, once he climbed to higher tiers, these advantages would quickly grow insignificant. If he climbed to higher tiers without increasing his advantages, the gap in strength between him and his peers would shrink continuously, and some might even surpass him. It should be known that even the Tier 5 experts on the main continent had much greater advantages accumulated than he currently did, let alone the main continent's Tier 6 God-ranked experts. This was because every veteran Tier 5 expert on the main continent would have several fragmented legendary items, with some even having legendary weapons and equipment. In addition, they also possessed a large number of Tier 5 skills and spells. The difference between a player wielding a large number of Tier 5 skills and a player with only 1 or 2 Tier 5 skills was bigger than the difference between a human and a dog. This was also why few Tier 5 and Tier 6 experts were willing to enter the miniature ancient world. Entering the miniature ancient world would mean losing all the advantages they had accumulated over the years. There wasn't even a guarantee they could accumulate as many advantages in the miniature ancient world as they previously had on the main continent. Shortly after Shifeng had sorted out the Dark Titan's loot and equipped the Abyssal Eye, the chains binding the spatial fissure started shattering one after another. At the same time, the spatial fissure's size also expanded by several times, occupying nearly half of the entire hall. Subsequently, the spatial fissure radiated a powerful attraction force that caused everyone to subconsciously gravitate toward it. Shifeng and the others had to resist with all their strength just to avoid getting sucked into the spatial fissure. At the same time, a system notification rang in everyone's ears. System, Gate of Crossing activated. The wielder of the complete key may safely teleport up to 20 people to the stratified abyssal realm through the Gate of Crossing. Once used, the key will enter a cooldown period of 10 natural days to accumulate energy. The key will also be required to safely return from the stratified abyssal realm. Those without the key's protection, please enter with caution. Why are there only 20 slots? Rain Song couldn't help but be confused when she heard the system notification. Crimson Heart and Cleansed Rue also couldn't help but be surprised and frown at this revelation. According to the information they found through investigating the Dragonfall secret land, they discovered that the stratified abyssal realm was a massive place. It was much larger than even the empires on the main continent. Although the stratified abyssal realm had a strict level limit, its player population should amount to 1 billion at the very least. After all, aside from the countless native powers, plenty of experts from the various gods' domains also operated there. In their opinion, the teleportation gate should accommodate 1,000 players at a time, at the very least. Otherwise, how were foreign players like themselves supposed to thrive in the stratified abyssal realm? Yet, now, the system was telling them that they would only receive 20 entry slots. After setting aside the Tower Alliance's 2 slots, they still had to split half of the remaining 18 slots to Zero Wing. This meant that 100 Flower Palace would only have 9 entry slots. What could they possibly do with just 9 slots? The amount of items 9 players could carry was incredibly limited. There was no way they could establish a long-term trade channel with just 9 players. Not to mention, the currency used in the stratified abyssal realm was different from the currencies they used. This is much better than we initially anticipated. Unlike 100 Flower Palace's members, Bloodhammer, the leader of the Tower Alliance's party, revealed an excited expression when he heard the system notification. Although they were 4 or 5 entry slots shorter than their initial expectations, the cooldown of the Gate of Crossing here was only 10 days. That was significantly better than some of the other gates with month-long cooldowns. If Bloodhammer were to learn that 100 Flower Palace's members had come into the Ceiling Labyrinth thinking that they could acquire 1,000 entry slots into the stratified abyssal realm, he would probably laugh himself to death. The stratified abyssal realm was a special location that connected the many worlds of God's domain. If every God's domain could periodically send 1,000 players into the stratified abyssal realm, it wouldn't take long before the various God's domains players outnumbered the native players. If that were the case, the various stratified abyssal realms wouldn't have remained under the absolute control of the various native powers all this time. The various gods' domains powers wouldn't have had to try to butter up to the stratified abyssal realm's native powers. Being able to gain 9 entry slots every 10 days was a privilege that could make even the greater gods' domains' various peak powers grow envious. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3090_9 slots. Shifeng was greatly surprised when he heard the system notification. It seems I'll have to make ample preparations for this. 9 slots. Shifeng was greatly surprised when he heard the system notification. It seems I'll have to make ample preparations for this. Shifeng possessed an in-depth understanding of the stratified abyssal realm. The average Gate of Crossing could only accommodate 5 or 6 people, with larger ones accommodating up to 10 people. Yet, not only could the Gate of Crossing before them teleport up to 20 players at a time, but it only had a short cooldown of 10 days. The value of this gate alone was several times greater than the combined value of several Tier 6 God-ranked experts. It should be known that in addition to allowing players from God's domain to travel to the stratified abyssal realm, the Gates of Crossing also allowed players native to the stratified abyssal realm to travel to God's domain. The only difference was that the stratified Abyssal Realms native players needed to pay an exorbitant price in 7 luminaries crystals to travel to God's domain. According to Shifeng's knowledge, the amount of 7 luminaries crystals that native players needed to pay to leave would differ depending on their combat standards. The higher a player's combat standards, the more 7 luminaries crystals they needed to fork out when leaving the stratified Abyssal Realm. Even experts at the World Tower's first floor standard were already required to pay 1,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal to leave, while second floor experts were required to pay 3,000 units. However, 1,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal was a sum that a second-rate guild would need 2 months to collect. Although first-rate guilds and superpowers could collect a lot more 7 luminaries crystals, it simply wasn't worthwhile to do so. Players who reached the World Tower's first floor might be recognized as experts in the Greater God's Domain, but they weren't exceptionally rare or powerful experts. They wouldn't even be considered top-ranking experts in the various first-rate guilds. As for second-floor experts, while they were indeed powerful combatants, the cost to teleport a second-floor expert out of the stratified Abyssal Realm was 3,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal. Even a first-rate guild could only afford to teleport one such expert out of the stratified Abyssal Realm once every 2 months. Not to mention, due to the stratified Abyssal Realm's restrictions, native experts were at a very low level and tier. So, guilds would have to invest a lot of time and resources to develop these experts to their full potential. For a God's Domain that had yet to gain access to the Greater God's Domain, the stratified Abyssal Realm's true value lay in the trade opportunities it offered. The stratified Abyssal Realm possessed various precious resources that weren't available in God's Domain. Even if they set aside the stratified Abyssal Realm's unique resources, the skills, spells, combat techniques, and mana techniques the stratified Abyssal Realm possessed were also far superior to what was available in their God's Domain. Due to the various stratified Abyssal Realms having a very low level cap on average, the native players there compensated for their lacking levels and tiers by developing their skills, spells, combat techniques, and mana techniques. It was especially true when it came to the development of combat techniques and mana techniques. The various stratified Abyssal Realms had far surpassed the many worlds of God's Domain and reached an entirely different level. Moreover, different stratified Abyssal Realms would have different civilization cultures and development paths. Because of this, the variety of combat techniques and mana techniques the various stratified Abyssal Realms possessed was so large that it could astonish even the Greater God's Domain's hegemonic powers. If an isolated God's Domain could gain access to these combat techniques and mana techniques, these techniques would greatly help its development. Meanwhile, 9 entry slots were already more than enough for Shifeng to do many things in the stratified Abyssal Realm. Afterward, Shifeng, Crimson Heart, and Bloodhammer agreed to meet before the Gate of Crossing 2 days later. Though, after factoring in the time needed to traverse the Sealing Labyrinth, they would only have 1 day to prepare once they returned to their respective God's Domains. So, they were considerably tight on time. After agreeing on a time, everyone promptly took out a return scroll and teleported back to their respective God's Domains. Miniature Ancient World, Abyssal Star City. When Shifeng and Gentle Snow teleported back to Zero Wing's residence, they quickly noticed that the residence was missing some of its liveliness and prosperity. Many guild members in the residence also wore looks of frustration and envy. Before Shifeng could even begin to wonder what had happened while he was gone, a series of message notifications rang in his ears. After checking his message interface, Shifeng found that several dozen people had messaged him these past few days. Among these people, Su Qianliu and Blackie had sent him the most messages, each of them sending several dozen messages. Did something happen? Shifeng grew a little confused as he looked at the several hundred unread messages in his inbox. Before leaving, Shifeng had already informed Su Qianliu and Blackie that he would be taking care of something important and that they shouldn't contact him unless it was something urgent. It was especially true for offline communication. He told them that unless Zero Wing was under the threat of destruction, they absolutely should not try to contact him in the real world. The Sealing Labyrinth was a special location that granted access to the stratified Abyssal Realm, so players were prohibited from communicating with the outside world or logging out of the game while inside it. Although players wouldn't be put into real danger for logging out of the game, Their in-game souls would be weakened for a certain period as a penalty. It seems something big happened while we were away, Gentle Snow said. Yaoyu messaged me saying that a new expansion pack called Primordial Demons Awakening appeared while we were away. Along with the introduction of this expansion pack, a special building appeared outside the various NPC cities. This building leads to a primordial secret land, and players can hunt for mounts in that secret land. Moreover, the leveling inside is at least 2 times faster. Hunt for mounts. Realization dawned on Shifeng when he heard Gentle Snow's words. Mounts could greatly increase a player's leveling speed and range of movement. However, there was still no reliable way to acquire mounts in the miniature ancient world. Even Shifeng had only obtained his mount in the primordial demon court by chance. Now that a reliable means of acquiring mounts had appeared, it wasn't strange to see players causing a huge commotion over it. However, this was a huge problem for Zero Wing. After all, Zero Wing's operations were based in Abyssal Star City. It didn't have a base of operations in any NPC city. So, there was no way Zero Wing could compete against the various powers. But entering this primordial secret land isn't an easy task. Players will have to raid team dungeons to acquire the secret land's teleportation tokens, and each team dungeon will only drop around a dozen tokens. Moreover, even after entering the secret land, players are only allowed to stay there for a limited time, Gentle Snow explained. So, the various powers are frantically searching for and raiding team dungeons right now. Many powers have started a fight over team dungeons, and even Mysterious Moon has already suffered over 10,000 casualties. There's a dramatic difference in leveling speed between players with and without mounts. Team dungeons also appear randomly in the various maps, so not even the various superpowers can monopolize them. Even small guilds will try to compete for some team dungeons in this situation. So long as they get into the team dungeon, there'd be nothing other powers can do about it. So, it's normal for Mysterious Moon to suffer such losses, Shifeng said. He wasn't surprised that Mysterious Moon had suffered so many casualties. Mounts were a key factor that could decide a guild's future. No guild would be willing to give up on the opportunity to acquire a large number of mounts. While Shifeng and Gentle Snow were conversing, Su Qianliu suddenly approached them in a hurry. "You're finally back, guild leader," Su Qianliu said as she looked at Shifeng, who had just walked out of the residence's teleportation hall. "Something big has happened while you were away. Had you taken even a day longer to reply, Blackie and I would have had to contact you by force. Did something happen to Zero Wing?" Shifeng asked in confusion. The current Zero Wing was prospering greatly in the miniature ancient world. Although the new expansion pack had thrown a monkey wrench into Zero Wing's development plans, it wasn't so bad that the guild would face destruction. "It's not Zero Wing," Su Qianliu said, shaking her head. "But it isn't completely unrelated to Zero Wing, either. Specifically, something major has taken place over at the Azura Mercenary Alliance. Chief Administrator Hidden Soul and many other peak experts intend to withdraw from Azura. TL notes, for those wondering, peak powers and hegemonic powers are 2 new terms the author has introduced. Hegemonic powers are above peak powers. I don't know how they compare to the superpowers in Shifeng's God's Domain, though. Also, Su Qianliu, Blackie, and the others still aren't aware that the Azura Mercenary Alliance is actually owned by Zero Wing. Hence, Su Qianliu's manner of speaking. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 163, Ultimatum. Chapter 163, Ultimatum. Shifeng was a little stunned by Su Qianliu's words, his mind failing to process those words immediately. Hidden Soul wasn't some nobody. Su Qianliu and the others might not be aware of it, but Hidden Soul was an outer member of Zero Wing. It was also under Shifeng's suggestion that Hidden Soul had established the Azura Mercenary Alliance and recruited a large number of independent experts for Zero Wing. However, the action of establishing the Azura Mercenary Alliance wasn't only beneficial to Zero Wing. It was also beneficial for Hidden Soul herself. No player in God's Domain could progress very far if they relied only on themselves. If a player wished to reach the apex of God's Domain, they'd need a large amount of resources that required a lot of manpower to obtain. This was also why Shifeng had chosen to establish Zero Wing and the Azura Mercenary Alliance. Zero Wing and Azura might not look like much right now, but once they took shape, both organizations would be extremely useful in helping him acquire the astronomical amount of 7 luminaries crystals required to reach Tier 6. He would also have a much easier time obtaining high-tiered skills, high-tiered spells, and legendary items. In order to become an apex expert in God's domain, players didn't just need to have incredibly high combat standards. They also needed fragmented legendary items, and a large collection of high-tiered skills and spells. A player would only become complete as an apex expert after meeting all these requirements. Meanwhile, the requirements to become a true Tier 6 God-ranked expert were even higher. In a certain sense, legendary items and Tier 5 and Tier 6 skills and spells were even more important for Tier 6 God-ranked experts. Almost every legendary item in God's domain could grant players the strength to transcend tiers. Suppose that, by some miracle, an ordinary expert managed to get his hands on 2 or 3 legendary items. If a Beyond Domain Realm expert with no legendary items were to fight this ordinary expert at the same tier, the fight would end with an overwhelming victory in the ordinary expert's favor. However, searching for and obtaining legendary items involved a lot of time and effort. If Shifeng tried to do everything by himself, all he'd end up with was nothing. This was something Hidden Soul was also well aware of. It was also why she had gladly agreed to help him establish the Azura Mercenary Alliance. With Azura's support, she, too, could develop her strength much more rapidly. Yet, now, Su Qianliu was telling him that Hidden Soul wanted to withdraw from the Azura Mercenary Alliance. No matter how Shifeng thought about it, this situation simply didn't make sense. I'm sure you are also aware of Azura's situation, guild leader. It is only thanks to Chief Administrator Hidden Soul that Azura has attracted so many powerful experts and customers. It is also thanks to these customers that Zero Wing has managed to earn enough funds to keep itself afloat and even purchase Shadow's Lanhua Tower. Not to mention, Chief Administrator Hidden Soul has also helped out with training Zero Wing's recruits. If Chief Administrator Hidden Soul were to leave, Su Qianliu dared not continue her words after speaking up to this point. Guild leader, they are currently holding a meeting in Azura's headquarters. Can you head over there and try to dissuade Chief Administrator Hidden Soul and Azura's executives from leaving? If Hidden Soul were to leave, the Azura Mercenary Alliance wouldn't be the only one affected. Zero Wing would also have its development severely impacted. However, the fact that Azura was still silent about this situation meant that there was still room for negotiations. Unfortunately, Su Qianliu didn't have any rights to speak in the Azura Mercenary Alliance, so she couldn't stop Hidden Soul from leaving. Shifeng was the only person in Zero Wing who had speaking rights in Azura. Alright, I'll go and take a look, Shifeng said, nodding. After saying so, he promptly made his way toward Azura's headquarters, questions filling his mind. Inside the top-floor conference room of Azura's headquarters. On the surface, it was announced that Azura was currently holding a meeting between its executives. In reality, though, there were only 4 people seated inside the large conference room. On one side of the conference table sat Hidden Soul and a ferocious man looking to be in his 50s. On the other side sat Liu Wuxing and Blue Sheath. Currently, all 4 of these people had already reached level 107. They were 2 levels higher than the miniature ancient world's frontline experts, and even the various superpowers peak experts would be shocked if they saw these 4 people's levels. This was because even the various superpowers peak experts were only at level 106. Not to mention, at level 107, Hidden Soul and the others would no longer have to worry about the problem of level suppression when roaming level 110 plus maps. Are you intent on withdrawing, Miss Soul? Liu Wuxing asked as he looked at Hidden Soul. Won't you consider talking things out with Mr. Black Flame? Further discussions are unnecessary, Hidden Soul said, shaking her head. The Flower of 7 Sins has already issued its ultimatum. If my old friends and I do not leave Azura, the Flower of 7 Sins will begin targeting Azura in all aspects. I'm sure I don't have to explain to you what the Flower of 7 Sins is capable of, Mr. Liu. If we do not leave, Azura's future will be ruined. I'm sure this isn't something Guild Leader Black Flame wishes to see. Not to mention, Guild Leader Black Flame is still missing. If we delay our withdrawal any further and the Flower of Seven Sins begins to take action, all of Azura's customers are certain to leave. The same goes for Azura's experts. After hearing Hidden Soul's words, Liu Wusheng opened and closed his mouth several times. However, no matter how he racked his mind, he simply couldn't come up with any rebuttals. The various first-rate powers in God's domain might not know the full extent of the Flower of Seven Sins' capabilities. However, it was a different story for Witch's Sin, a guild that had secretly reached the standard of the various superpowers already. The Flower of Seven Sins might not have as many members as any of the 5 great superguilds, but the number of experts it possessed absolutely exceeded every one of the 5 great superguilds. Moreover, because the Flower of Seven Sins wasn't a guild but a covert organization instead, there was no use placing a bounty on it. Members of the Flower of Seven Sins typically kept their identities hidden. Most members didn't even know where the organization's main headquarters was located. According to rumors, the Great Commander was the only person who knew exactly how many members and trump cards the organization had. Not even the 6 other commanders of the organization knew about these details. Meanwhile, so long as someone was willing to pay the price, the Flower of Seven Sins would dare to accept even a commission for the heads of the 5 great superguilds' guild leaders. Moreover, not only was there a precedent of this situation, but the Flower of Seven Sins had even completed the commission successfully. Although Liu Wusheng didn't know why the Flower of Seven Sins had decided to target Hidden Soul, an ex-commander of the organization, it was a fact that the assassination organization had issued a warning to the Azura Mercenary Alliance. However, judging by the fact that only the 4 of them had received this notice, he could also tell that the Flower of Seven Sins didn't wish to offend Azura too much. The organization only wished for Azura to keep its hands out of Hidden Soul's problem. However, there wasn't anything Azura could do about this situation, either. Others might not be aware of Azura's current situation, but Liu Wusheng was. If Azura tried to go against the Flower of Seven Sins, it'd be no different than trying to crack a rock with an egg. Black Flame, the person behind the Azura Mercenary Alliance, might come from an incredibly strong power, but how much strength could this extraordinary power employ in this god's domain? It should be known that the Flower of Seven Sins was one of the strongest powers in this god's domain. Getting targeted by the Flower of Seven Sins would be an absolute nightmare for Azura. Interesting. So it's a warning from the Flower of Seven Sins? While Liu Wusheng was racking his mind for a solution, the doors to the conference room suddenly opened. Then, a chuckle that Liu Wusheng and Hidden Soul were familiar with came through the doors. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3092_Guild Leader Black Flame. Guild Leader Black Flame. Liu Wusheng and Hidden Soul were both surprised by Shifeng's sudden appearance. However, the 2 wore different expressions when they saw Shifeng, the former looking pleasantly surprised and the latter looking ashamed. Level 110. The ferocious middle-aged man seated beside Hidden Soul was similarly surprised when he saw Shifeng. However, the reason for his surprise was different from Liu Wusheng and Hidden Soul. Unlike the others present, the ferocious middle-aged man had a special identification skill that allowed him to ignore the concealment effects of black cloaks. Hence, even though Shifeng was hiding his information with a black cloak, he could see Shifeng's level the instant Shifeng had entered the room. Liu Wusheng, Hidden Soul, and Blue Sheath were all experts with extraordinary senses. Although the middle-aged man had exclaimed in a very soft voice, the 3 of them still managed to hear his words loud and clear. Meanwhile, all 3 of them couldn't help but turn to look at Shifeng in even greater surprise after hearing the middle-aged man's mutterings. Have you really reached level 110 already, Guild Leader Black Flame? Liu Wusheng asked, unable to hold back his curiosity. It should be known that his current level of 107 already allowed him to look down on the entire miniature ancient world. He could even move about freely in level 115 plus maps at this level. Although Liu Wusheng had expected Shifeng to be above him in levels considering the other party's strength, he didn't expect there to be such a huge difference. If it were in the past, reaching level 110 wouldn't be a big deal since it was only a minor turning point for players. At most, players would receive more basic attributes from their level 150 epic weapons and equipment. However, that all changed ever since the introduction of the most recent expansion pack. The primordial secret land that got introduced with the expansion pack had two separate maps with different level limits. The first map only allowed players under level 110 to enter, while the second map only allowed players between level 110 and level 120. Before reaching level 110, players couldn't enter the second map. Currently, the first map only dropped mounts up to the Mysterious Iron rank. Meanwhile, a Mysterious Iron mount's combat power only rivaled Lord-ranked monsters of the same level. A mount of this rank could just barely be of help to expert players. On the other hand, the Primordial Secret Land's second map dropped up to Secret Silver mounts. Meanwhile, a Secret Silver mount possessed strength rivaling High Lords of the same level. With such combat power, a Secret Silver mount could be of significant help to players out in the fields. After all, most of the monsters found in even level 115 maps were only at the High Lord standard. Not to mention, no powers were competing over the second map yet. So, the acquisition rate for mounts in the second map would surpass the first map. I have indeed reached level 110 for some time now. Shifeng nodded, not bothering to hide his level. However, he couldn't help but be surprised as he looked at the middle-aged man beside Hidden Soul. The black cloak might not be infallible, but a top-tier identification skill would still be required to see through a black cloak's concealment effect. Such identification skills were not commonly available in God's domain. Even a top-tier first-rate guild wouldn't have more than 10 people with such identification skills. Yet, despite being an independent expert, the middle-aged man owned one such identification skill. Shifeng had already memorized the names and appearances of the many experts in God's domain who possessed such top-tier identification skills. Yet, even though the middle-aged man named Frenzied Smile was already at the domain realm, Shifeng had no recollection of this person whatsoever. When Hidden Soul noticed the look of surprise on Shifeng's face, she took the initiative to introduce the middle-aged man beside her, saying, "Let me introduce you. This person here is Frenzied Smile, one of the former 7 great elders of the Flower of Seven Sins Board of Elders. Ever since he retired from his position, he has always lived a secluded life. I had to go through a lot of trouble to find him. Greetings, Guild Leader Black Flame," Frenzied Smile said as he stood up and nodded at Shifeng. "Although I've heard Commander Soul speak many things about you before, it would seem that you are even more amazing than she described." "You flatter me, Elder Smile," Shifeng said with a smile. "The fact that you are willing to join the Azura Mercenary Alliance is an honor for Azura." Domain realm experts were highly contested among the various superpowers. Even the 5 great guilds were no exception. This was because domain realm experts had the strength necessary to lead and safeguard important locations. They also had a considerable chance of becoming a Tier 6 God-ranked expert in the future. However, upon hearing Shifeng's words, Frenzied Smile's expression immediately grew a little awkward. Then, he said, "I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint you, Guild Leader Black Flame. While my friends and I are interested in becoming a part of Azura, Death Omen, the current commander for the Flower of Seven Sins Sin of Pride, has already issued an ultimatum to Azura. If we insist on joining Azura, not only will we bring no benefit to the Mercenary Alliance, but we will even bring trouble with us instead." Hidden Soul wore a somber expression when she heard Frenzied Smile's words. Death Omen was Hidden Soul's younger cousin's sister, and the girl was incredibly talented. Originally, Death Omen was one of the potential contenders for the title of Pride in the Flower of Seven Sins. However, the title eventually landed in Hidden Soul's hands, and Hidden Soul became the Sin of Pride's first commander in God's domain. Now, though, Death Omen had become the Sin of Pride's new commander. If Death Omen was the only person Hidden Soul was going up against, she could have simply ignored the girl's threat. After all, Death Omen only held command over the Sin of Pride. The problem was that Supreme Sky stood behind Death Omen. Supreme Sky was the owner of Greed, and he was the second most powerful person in the Flower of Seven Sins, coming behind only the Great Commander. Meanwhile, Supreme Sky was typically responsible for handling most of the Flower of Seven Sins affairs. Hence, Death Omen's threat could also be regarded as the will of the Flower of Seven Sins. As a former commander of the Flower of Seven Sins, Hidden Soul was fully aware of what it meant to go against the will of the Flower of Seven Sins. If the Azura Mercenary Alliance did not heed the Flower of Seven Sins warning, the only outcome awaiting Azura would be elimination. There was no way Azura, in its current state, could go up against the Flower of Seven Sins. After all, even a veteran super guild like World Dominators was no different than an infant before an adult when going up against the Flower of Seven Sins. The only powers capable of truly contending with the Flower of Seven Sins were the 5 great super guilds, existences that had existed for more than 100 years. Aren't you underestimating Azura too much, Elder Smile? Shifeng suddenly laughed as he looked at Frenzied Smile's awkward expression. The Flower of Seven Sins might be strong, but that doesn't make Azura a pushover. Since the Azura Mercenary Alliance has decided to let Hidden Soul become its chief administrator and even have her recruit former members of the Flower of Seven Sins like yourself without consulting the Flower of Seven Sins beforehand, it means that Azura has never cared what the Flower of Seven Sins would think of this decision. Hidden Soul was momentarily stunned when she heard Shifeng's words. She never expected Shifeng to say such words. At this moment, an array of emotions filled her heart. There was excitement, anxiety, and shame. It should be known that even the various superpowers would grow fearful when hearing the name of the Flower of Seven Sins, let alone receiving a warning from the assassin organization. After all, there were precedents of the Flower of Seven Sins destroying entire superpowers in God's domain. At this moment, Hidden Soul wasn't the only person stunned by Shifeng's words. Liu Wusheng was similarly dumbfounded. Was this the prelude to an all-out war between the Azura Mercenary Alliance and the Flower of Seven Sins? Are your words true, Guild Leader Black Flame? Frenzied Smile asked as he looked at Shifeng with a serious expression. I'm not sure if you know this, but the Flower of Seven Sins has enough strength and wealth to destroy even the superpowers in God's domain. The Azura Mercenary Alliance will never regret its decisions. If the Flower of Seven Sins wishes to target Azura, Azura won't mind giving the Flower of Seven Sins a fight, Shifeng said affirmatively. Good. As expected of a power commander Soul has settled on. Frenzied Smile laughed. Since the Azura Mercenary Alliance is willing to go to such an extent for retired folks like us, we won't back down, either. We are willing to fight with the Mercenary Alliance. Elder Smile. Hidden Soul couldn't help but feel exasperated when she heard Frenzied Smile's words. Frenzied Smile had evidently included her in his declaration. Don't tell me you're willing to give in like this, Commander Soul? Frenzied Smile asked as he looked at Hidden Soul. If you still choose to quit even after Azura has agreed to help us, you're going to disappoint us old folks. Hidden Soul hesitated for some time after hearing Frenzied Smile's words. Eventually, though, she gritted her teeth and said, Fine, I'll fight with Supreme Sky, then, even if I lose, I'll be damned if I don't knock out a few of his teeth. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3093 Frenzied Soul sighed in relief when he heard Hidden Soul's decision. Frenzied Soul sighed in relief when he heard Hidden Soul's decision. Hidden Soul was the strongest among the former Flower of Seven Sins members that had joined Azura. If comparing purely in terms of techniques, some Tier 6 God-ranked experts weren't even her match. If it were on the main continent, Hidden Soul definitely couldn't pose a threat to the Flower of Seven Sins since she never managed to reach Tier 6. However, it was a different story in the miniature ancient world. Now that everyone was still at Tier 3, Hidden Soul was undoubtedly one of the strongest experts in the miniature ancient world, and even the Flower of Seven Sins would have difficulty dealing with her. Meanwhile, the benefits the Azura Mercenary Alliance offered were incredibly attractive to them, experts who couldn't reach Tier 6. If they were to leave Azura now, it was almost impossible for them to find another holy land like Abyssal Star City's primordial tower. So, now that the Azura Mercenary Alliance was willing to shield them even at the risk of offending the Flower of Seven Sins, it'd be too much of a waste for them to give up without a fight. Guild leader Blackflame, we might not have to worry about getting targeted since we have Abyssal Star City as our base, but if the Flower of Seven Sins decides to go after our customers, I'm afraid there is very little we can do about it. Many of the experts that have recently joined Azura might even decide to leave as a result, Liu Wusheng suddenly said. This is an especially worrisome problem considering many of our customers have been commissioning quests to acquire mounts recently. This leaves the Mercenary Alliance's experts with no choice but to head for the surrounding NPC cities to raid team dungeons for the Primordial Secret Lands entry tokens. Meanwhile, this is the perfect opportunity for the Flower of Seven Sins to hinder our members from completing their quests. Whenever the Flower of Seven Sins decided to go after a power, it would typically go after the power's core experts and executives. Either that, or it would target the power's various income sources. However, the Azura Mercenary Alliance's main development area was centered around Abyssal Star City. Meanwhile, Abyssal Star City was a stronghold that the 5 great super guilds could not destroy even if all 5 of them worked together. Naturally, there was no way the Flower of Seven Sins could do anything about the city by itself. Hence, it was obvious what method the Flower of Seven Sins would choose to target the Azura Mercenary Alliance. The Flower of Seven Sins would target Azura's various businesses and crush the Mercenary Alliance using its vastly superior manpower and financial strength. Currently, the Azura Mercenary Alliance relied mainly on commissions made by leisure players to earn credits and sustain the livelihoods of the Mercenary Alliance's independent experts. The main goal of every independent expert in joining the Azura Mercenary Alliance was to earn credits and resources in God's domain. However, if these independent experts were prevented from completing their quests and could not earn any credits, it was only natural that they would withdraw from the Mercenary Alliance. After all, these independent experts needed to live. Meanwhile, if the customers who had commissioned the quests saw that their quests weren't being completed even after a long time, they would definitely choose to take their business elsewhere. If this situation persisted, the Azura Mercenary Alliance would eventually crumble due to a lack of customers. Of course, there was also the option of Zero Wing and Witch's Sin sending their experts to complete these quests. However, the problem with this solution was that experts weren't cabbages. It might be fine to do so once or twice, but Zero Wings and Witch's Sin's development would definitely be affected if this method was employed over a long period. Fortunately, not all was lost. There was still one method Azura could employ to counteract the Flower of Seven Sins obstruction, having stronger experts take on the quests. For example, they could have Refinement Realm experts take on a quest that normally needed only first-rate experts to complete. The Flower of Seven Sins could also be regarded as an independent organization in a sense. Whenever the organization had its members do work for it, it would pay them according to the job's difficulty. Meanwhile, a simple obstruction job would naturally yield a small pay, and powerful experts naturally wouldn't be interested in taking on such jobs. Hence, if Azura raised the overall strength of the experts taking on its quests, the experts the Flower of Seven Sins sent would naturally fail to obstruct Azura's experts. However, if the Azura Mercenary Alliance chose to take this route, it would have to spend money and resources to subsidize the customers' quests. Only by doing so would stronger independent experts be interested in taking on these quests. After all, the Primordial Tower's environment wasn't attractive to most independent experts. It was only attractive to Tier 5 experts who had trouble reaching Tier 6. As I thought, it's still going to come down to a competition of wealth, huh? Hidden Soul understood what Liu Wusheng was trying to say. Immediately she said, I can provide 1 billion credits to the Alliance to subsidize the customers' quests. Although I can't offer as much as Commander Soul, I can still provide roughly 200 million credits. If I get the others to contribute some, it shouldn't be difficult for us to get another 1 billion, Frenzied Smile said. Witch's Sin can provide 5 billion credits, but I'm afraid that even this amount of credits wouldn't last us very long, Liu Wusheng said, shaking his head. Currently, our customers are only offering 100,000 credits per basic mount, which is equivalent to 1,000 gold. However, it takes at least a 100-man expert team to procure a common mount. Assuming they manage to complete the quest in a day, each player on the team will only receive 1,000 credits. A daily salary of 1,000 credits will only tempt first-rate experts. If we want to get the independent refinement realm experts interested, we'll need to bump the daily salary up to 3,000 credits. In other words, we'll have to subsidize 200,000 credits per common mount. I'm afraid it's going to be even worse for higher-ranking mounts. We'll have to subsidize around 1 million credits for each bronze mount and 3 million credits for each mysterious iron mount. Currently, we are receiving over 1,000 common mount quests, 70 bronze mount quests, and 30 mysterious iron mount quests per day. That's around 400 million a day in subsidies. Moreover, this is only the initial estimate. If the Flower of Seven Sins also increases the rewards for its quests, we'll probably have to spend even more money. Hidden Soul and Frenzied Smile felt a little stressed when they heard Liu Wuxing's words. Even a conservative estimate placed them at spending 400 million credits a day. If the Flower of Seven Sins were to increase the rewards for its quests, Azura would also have to respond by further increasing its rewards. This was already beyond the level of throwing money away. It was true that Abyssal Star City was making a lot of money every day. Currently, the city was earning over 100,000 gold per day in entry fees alone. If they included the income generated through the city's shops, the city should have no problem ensuring a daily income of 200,000 gold. However, that was before they included Abyssal Star City's upkeep cost. Not to mention, the Azura Mercenary Alliance also needed to use a portion of its income to purchase lands in NPC cities to expand its sphere of influence. Simply put, Azura couldn't afford to waste so many credits every day, especially not over a long period. Yet, a competition of financial strength with the Flower of Seven Sins was fated to be a long and arduous process. There's no need to offer such a large subsidy, Shifeng said, shaking his head. Moreover, none of you need to contribute any credits. We can simply use the Alliance's contribution points to replace the credit subsidy. Since this is the Alliance's problem, it will naturally be up to the Alliance to deal with it. But the Alliance's contribution points have limited attraction over independent players. Most independent experts are only trying to acquire a bronze membership to enter Abyssal Star City freely. They don't have much interest in the Primordial Tower, Liu Wuxing said with a bitter smile. It would naturally be wonderful if they could use contribution points as a subsidy instead of credits. After all, one contribution point was equivalent to 40 silver coins already. Moreover, contribution points could only be spent in the Mercenary Alliance. So, by using contribution points as a subsidy, not only could they reduce the burden on the Alliance's finances, but they could minimize the actual outflow of funds. After all, purchasing a bronze membership in the Alliance cost 5,000 contribution points, while offering a bronze membership cost the Alliance next to nothing. However, the freedom of entering Abyssal Star City wasn't particularly tempting to most independent experts right now. After all, most players couldn't really benefit from Abyssal Star City before reaching level 110. Currently, the only players visiting the city were merchant players and the various powers management personnel. No. These independent experts will soon become very interested in Azura's membership, Shifeng said, smiling. Then, he took out a light blue crystal from his bag and said, starting today, members who have reached bronze status or above in the Azura Mercenary Alliance will be allowed to exchange for this item. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3094 A Lineage Crystal. A Lineage Crystal. Liu Wuxing and the others were stunned when they saw the light blue crystal in Shifeng's hand. Although they had never heard of the lineage crystal before, based on the information displayed before them, this lineage crystal was simply amazing. With this lineage crystal, players only needed to spend some magic crystals to convert to another race. There was no need to go through the trouble of finding and completing rare conversion quests or changing factions. Most importantly, the lineage crystal allowed players to convert to races available during primordial times rather than the descendants of those primordial races. This meant that players who converted their race using the lineage crystal would have a higher life rating than players who converted their race through completing quests. In other words, besides allowing players to convert to another race easily, the lineage crystal also increased players' life ratings. Compared to the miniature worlds inside the primordial tower, the lineage crystal would definitely be 100 times more attractive to the majority of the experts in the Azura Mercenary Alliance. Guild leader Black Flame, pardon me for asking this, but how many of these lineage crystals can the Azura Mercenary Alliance provide? Are there 20? Or are there 30? Liu Wusheng asked in a slightly trembling voice. Also, how many contribution points will it cost to exchange them? Is it 2 million? Or is it 3 million? Even by looking at the lineage crystal's description alone, Liu Wusheng could tell that this item would send the entire miniature ancient world into an uproar. Setting aside the opportunity to gain the superior talents of other races, just the lineage crystal's ability to grant players a higher life rating was already more than enough to tempt everyone in the miniature ancient world. An increase in life rating could bring improvements far more valuable than any piece of weapon or equipment could provide. For example, the higher a player's life rating in God's domain, the stronger one's basic attributes and physique would be compared to other players of the same tier and level. In addition, players would also have an easier time learning combat techniques with a higher life rating. It was similar to how players of a higher tier would have an easier time learning combat techniques than players of a lower tier. However, it was far too difficult to increase one's tier. Setting aside the barrier between Tier 5 and Tier 6, just the barrier between Tier 3 and Tier 4 was already more than enough to stump countless expert players. If a player could grow stronger without having to increase their tier, it meant that this player could secure more opportunities than other players of the same tier. This, in turn, meant that this player would have a much greater chance of ascending to a higher tier. With the miniature ancient world being opened for less than a month, every combat player in the miniature ancient world would probably go crazy over the lineage crystal if they learned of its existence. However, if the Azura Mercenary Alliance wanted to attract the attention of independent experts, having just 1 or 2 lineage crystals wouldn't do it. After all, any independent player with common sense would know that these 1 or 2 lineage crystals would end up in the hands of the various powers experts. There was no way independent experts like themselves would get a turn. However, if Azura offered 20 or 30 lineage crystals up for exchange, even independent players would have a chance at exchanging for a lineage crystal. Meanwhile, so long as a chance existed, the many independent players in the miniature ancient world would definitely try to earn the Azura Mercenary Alliance's contribution points as if their lives depended on it. Of course, that was under the precondition that the lineage crystal wasn't priced too absurdly. While the lineage crystals might be more valuable than even fragmented legendary items, even fragmented legendary items were only valued at around 500,000 gold. Although these fragmented legendary items were typically of the most inferior quality and only sold in special locations such as the auction houses of dark NPC cities, they were fragmented legendary items nonetheless. They could still provide players with a significant boost to combat power. Even if fragmented legendary items were more valuable in the miniature ancient world, the most a bottom-tier fragmented legendary item could sell for was around 1 million gold. So, offering the lineage crystals for 2 million contribution points each was just about right. Any higher, and they would no longer be within reach of most independent players. After hearing Liu Wusheng's questions, Hidden Soul and Frenzied Smile also turned to look at Shifeng curiously. They, too, wondered how many lineage crystals Shifeng could take out and how he planned on pricing them. Inwardly, though, both Hidden Soul and Frenzied Smile were resolved to purchase a lineage crystal for themselves even if it cost 5 million contribution points. 200 crystals, Shifeng said with a faint smile. Moreover, it won't cost too much to exchange for them. Anyone who is a bronze member of the Azura Mercenary Alliance can exchange the lineage crystal for just 1 million contribution points. Silver and gold members will even get 10% and 20% discounts. Of course, each member is only limited to 1 lineage crystal. 200. And at such a low price. Liu Wusheng felt his head growing faint when he heard Shifeng's words. Could you be joking, guild leader Black Flame? Although lineage crystals didn't provide as significant of an improvement to combat power as fragmented legendary items, the ability to reduce the difficulty of learning combat techniques, skills, and spells made the lineage crystals just as valuable as fragmented legendary items. Yet, Shifeng was offering the lineage crystals for only 1 million contribution points. Moreover, this price could even be discounted with higher-ranking memberships. The various independent players would go crazy if they learned about this. After all, it went without saying that the various powers would also try to get their hands on the lineage crystals. Meanwhile, so long as an independent player managed to get their hands on a lineage crystal, they could immediately resell it for a huge sum of money. Setting aside the various superpowers, even the various first-rate guilds would probably be willing to pay 1 million gold for a lineage crystal. Moreover, a supply of 200 lineage crystals was more than enough to give independent players a good chance at getting their hands on some. There was no need to worry that the various powers would empty Azura's shelves in the blink of an eye. It should also let Azura attract the attention of the various independent players for a long time. When Shifeng saw the dubious gazes everyone was giving him, he took out 200 lineage crystals from his bag and put them on the conference table. Then, he said, "I already told you not to underestimate Azura so much. The flower of 7 sins might be strong, but that doesn't make Azura weak. The lineage crystals might be valuable, but that was only for now. Once players began entering the Boundary Mountain range, they would realize that the lineage crystals weren't all that valuable after all. At most, its value rivaled a top-tier epic weapon." The moment Shifeng had gotten his hands on the lineage crystals, he had already decided to use them to increase the Azura Mercenary Alliance's fame. Otherwise, once Tier 4 experts started appearing among the various superpowers, there was no way Azura could withstand an assault from them with only the small number of independent experts they managed to attract thus far. There really are 200 crystals. Am I dreaming? Liu Wuxing and Hidden Soul widened their eyes in shock when they saw the small pile of crystals on the table. These were 200 fragmented legendary items they were talking about. They could already imagine how much of a sensation these lineage crystals would cause once their existence was publicized. "Do you believe in Azura's strength now?" Shifeng asked, smiling as he looked at Hidden Soul. "If there are no further problems, send a refusal notice to the Flower of 7 Sins. Tell them that they still do not have the qualifications to tell the Azura Mercenary Alliance how to do things. Also, inform all Alliance members about the Lineage Crystals exchange. _support us at h+stead novel _OK. I'll get it done right away," Hidden Soul said, a rare smile appearing on her face. "If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible." Chapter 3095 Miniature Ancient World, Southern Zone, Red Obsidian City. Miniature Ancient World, Southern Zone, Red Obsidian City. As one of the 12 holy cities in the Miniature Ancient World's 4 major zones, Red Obsidian City was only 1 sea away from the Boundary Mountain Range. It was the largest seaside city in the Miniature Ancient World's Sea of Red Tears. Due to Red Obsidian City being one of the few seaside cities that could conduct maritime trade with the Boundary Mountain Range, it became a highly contested location for the various powers. As evidence, there were at least 7 superpowers known to be using Red Obsidian City as the location for their main headquarters. There were also over 20 first-rate powers ignoring the threat of these superpowers and establishing their base of operations in Red Obsidian City. In less than a month since the Miniature Ancient World opened, Red Obsidian City's player population had already exceeded 80 million. When it came to player population, it was a megacity that could rank within the top 5 out of the several hundred cities in the Miniature Ancient World. However, what the various powers of Red Obsidian City weren't aware of was that there was actually a transcendental power secretly operating within the grey areas of the city. Meanwhile, this power was none other than the Flower of 7 Sins. Inside a VIP room in Red Tears Bar, the best bar available in Red Obsidian City. At this time, a masked young man clad in silvery grey clothing walked into the VIP room. The young man had a relatively average stature, measuring 1.7 meters only. After entering the room, the young man looked at the woman quietly sitting by the window and said, "A message came in from the Azura Mercenary Alliance, Big Sis Omen." The woman in question wore a crimson one-piece dress, and she possessed an ethereal beauty that made her look like a beautiful doll carved by a masterful artisan. However, if one observed this woman closely, one would realize that the woman's appearance wasn't the only astonishing thing about her. In addition to her looks, her level of 107 was more than enough to take the breath of any ordinary expert. Moreover, her crimson dress wasn't simply a cosmetic item. Instead, it was a bona fide fragmented legendary item. What message? The woman named Death Omen lazily asked as she glanced at the masked man. The message sender is Big Sis Soul. She has turned down our suggestion on Azura's behalf. Moreover, Big Sis Soul has asked you to pass on a message to Commander Sky, saying that she will reclaim the position she lost, the masked man said with a chuckle. What a fool, Death Omen said with contempt on her face. It is precisely because she refused to submit to Lord Sky that she has fallen to her current state. Had she chosen to go under Lord Sky's wing as I did, she would have long since reached Tier 6 by now and matched me in strength. It is also because of Lord Sky's kindness that she got away with only getting dismissed. Yet, as soon as she found herself an outer-world backer, she thinks she can go against Lord Sky. What should we do now? Should we take action against Azura? The masked man asked. A mere outer-world power dares interfere in the Flower of Seven Sins affairs. Do they honestly think a measly guild like World Dominators can represent all of the powers in our God's domain? Since they refuse to obey, there's no need for them to continue existing in the miniature ancient world, Death Omen said, a flash of cold light appearing in her eyes. Pass down my words. From today onward, everyone who takes on the quest to obstruct the Azura Mercenary Alliance will not only receive rewards equivalent to Azura's quests, but they will also receive an additional 100% bonus paid in contribution points. A 100% bonus? Isn't that a little too much? The masked man exclaimed. Azura is mainly offering mount quests right now, and even a common mount is worth 100,000 credits. However, it will take, at most, 20 half-step refinement realm experts to handle a team that is taking on such a quest. Just receiving an equivalent reward is already more than enough for them to make a significant profit. There's no need for us to subsidize an additional 100,000 credits. Essentially, they'd have to pay 200,000 credits just to obstruct one of Azura's quests. Although they could offset half of that price using contribution points, these contribution points would eventually be used to exchange for the Flower of Seven Sins resources. So, they'd still be paying out of their own pockets at the end of the day. The ones below will only be motivated to move if we offer more money. A reward of just 100,000 credits can only tempt a limited number of experts. Not to mention, there are plenty of half-step refinement realm experts and first-rate powers helping the Azura Mercenary Alliance. So, it's best to have the refinement realm experts on our side make a move, Death Omen calmly said. Also, inform the executioners to move as well. I want you to destroy all of Azura's businesses as soon as possible. Then, we'll see how much more confidence Hidden Soul has in going against Lord Sky. Other powers in God's domain were afraid of going against the Azura Mercenary Alliance because they operated in the light, which made them for easy targets. However, the Flower of Seven Sins operated in the dark. There was no way Azura could target the Flower of Seven Sins if nobody even knew the whereabouts of the Flower of Seven Sins members and base of operations. If the executioners move as well, that will make things simple, the masked man said, excitement appearing in his eyes. This was the biggest operation the Flower of Seven Sins had carried out since he had entered the miniature ancient world. The executioners were a group of assassins the Flower of Seven Sins had nurtured internally, and even the weakest among them was a refinement realm expert. Meanwhile, the executioners currently present in the miniature ancient world numbered 3,000. If 3,000 refinement realm experts took covert actions as a group, even the various superpowers would suffer severe losses, let alone an outer-world power. While the Flower of Seven Sins was making its move, a huge announcement was made in the Azura Mercenary Alliance's main headquarters. Lineage crystals were officially available for exchange now. Are you kidding me? Can we really exchange for such an item? Support us at hosted novel _1 million points. Isn't the exchange price way too high? You think 1 million points is a lot? If you have 1 million points or a lineage crystal, I'd be willing to buy it off your hands for 500,000 gold. How about it? 1 million contribution points will only get you 400,000 gold. You'd be making an easy 100,000 gold just by reselling the lineage crystal to me. That's basically enough money for a large villa. I'll pay 600,000 gold. I can give you even more if you're willing to accept credit. I'll even pay the full sum on the spot. Anyone interested? You want to buy something that's as valuable as a fragmented legendary item for just 600,000 gold? Did you forget to wake up today? Shortly after the exchange list over at the Azura Mercenary Alliance's warehouse got updated, a heated debate quickly ensued among the players that had flooded to the warehouse after reading the announcement, a flame of desire igniting in everyone's hearts. In the current situation where players could not ascend to Tier 4, anyone who managed to convert to a powerful race would essentially gain a fragmented legendary item. They would instantly soar to become one of the strongest experts in the miniature ancient world. Moreover, there'd be no need to worry that others might steal this advantage away from them. Not to mention, the benefits of having a stronger race could remain useful even after players reached Tier 4 and Tier 5. So, how could anyone resist the temptation of the lineage crystal? This won't do. I need to tell the commander about this quickly. Have our brothers get ready to move right away. The Alliance might run out of quests if we waste any more time. Something big has happened, Guild Leader. The Azura Mercenary Alliance has lost its mind. It's offering an item that's as good as a fragmented legendary item for only 1 million contribution point. While the crowd in front of the warehouse talked about the lineage crystal, many of those present also started contacting their companions, subordinates, and superiors. For a time, everyone in the Azura Mercenary Alliance went into a frenzy. Meanwhile, shortly after the Azura Mercenary Alliance pulled this stunt, news of the lineage crystal also reached the ears of the various powers. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3096_100 Flow City, Soulfire Adventurer Team's Gathering Point. 100 Flow City, Soulfire Adventurer Team's Gathering Point. Stop hesitating, Captain. Many powers have already gathered at Azura's headquarters to register. If we don't hurry up and join as well, there won't be any lineage crystals left for us, Moon Rain said as she looked at Southern Tiger. Your strength will rise to the next level so long as you can get your hands on a lineage crystal. We'll also have a much easier time exploring the Boundary Mountain Range in the future. We might even be able to get ahead of other powers and pioneer a path into the Boundary Mountain Range. Many powers in the miniature ancient world had decided to take a wait-and-see approach when the Azura Mercenary Alliance started recruiting members. After all, while Abyssal Star City was located very close to the Boundary Mountain Range, mainstream players were nowhere near reaching level 115. Moreover, joining Azura would mean losing the ability to go against the Mercenary Alliance. In addition, members would also be responsible for protecting the Mercenary Alliance. In a situation where the 5 great superguilds were targeting the Abyssal Star Primordial City, most people felt that the Azura Mercenary Alliance could, at most, survive until the various superpowers experts reached level 120 and got promoted to Tier 4. Not to mention, the various superpowers might have long since established guild towns and cities near the Boundary Mountain Range even before mainstream players reached level 115. In that case, there'd be no benefit in joining the Azura Mercenary Alliance. Most importantly, players could still enter Abyssal Star City even without joining the Azura Mercenary Alliance. At most, they'd have to stand in line for some time. However, things were different now. The lineage crystal that the Azura Mercenary Alliance had introduced into its exchange system recently was an item that rivaled fragmented legendary items in terms of usefulness. The various powers and independent expert teams might be able to ignore the benefit of having a slightly faster leveling speed. However, there was no way they could ignore something as valuable and useful as a fragmented legendary item. After all, the lineage crystal was something that could help establish a powerful team, and having a powerful team meant being able to acquire more and better weapons and equipment. Epic weapons and equipment might be powerful, but they were only a starting point for peak expert teams. What these teams aimed to acquire were fragmented legendary items, and they'd have to raid incredibly challenging team dungeons and secret lands to do so. Meanwhile, items such as the lineage crystal would be crucial in helping them accomplish this goal. However, the problem was that only members of the Azura Mercenary Alliance could exchange the lineage crystal. Or, more specifically, members who had reached the bronze rank or above. "I'm not hesitating," Southern Tiger said with a bitter smile. "I already sent someone to apply to join Azura as soon as I received news of the lineage crystal. However, there are just too many people applying to join, and the guy I sent says that there are several tens of thousands of people waiting in line before him. There are actually so many people waiting in line?" Moonrain was a little stunned when she heard Southern Tiger's words. After all, it hadn't been more than 15 minutes since news of the lineage crystal came out. Yet, there were already several tens of thousands of players waiting in line to join Azura over at the Mercenary Alliance's registration point in 100 Flow City. The speed of everyone's reactions was even more exaggerated than when they were competing for team dungeons out in the fields. "With so many people waiting in line, it'll take us at least a day before we can pick up a quest," Southern Tiger said, sighing. "The only thing we can do now is to try and collect some contribution points from Azura's members or find a trustworthy member of Azura and have them pick up a quest and turn it in on our behalf. But it won't be easy to find such a person. Azura's regulations state that normal members are only allowed to accept basic quests. Only higher-ranking members are allowed to take on more difficult quests and acquire more contribution points. Although quests for common mounts are available in large numbers right now, members of Azura will first have to complete 15 basic quests before they can accept a common mount quest. As for bronze and mysterious iron mount quests, only bronze members can accept those. Currently, there are only a very small number of players with bronze membership in Azura, and every one of them is a target of competition for the various guilds and adventurer teams. Although I've tried asking around, none of the people I know have a bronze membership in Azura. Someone with bronze membership? Moonrain suddenly thought of someone when she heard Southern Tiger's words. "Captain, do you still remember that advanced legacy we gave away some time ago?" "You mean the one we gave to that girl from Zero Wing?" Southern Tiger said, similarly recalling Wu Lingling. Originally, Southern Tiger was trying to get Shifeng, a Tier 6 God-ranked expert, to owe Soulfire a favor by giving the other party one of Soulfire's gold order. Unfortunately, Shifeng refused to take the bait, so Southern Tiger settled with giving the gold order to Wu Lingling. Although Soulfire had technically formed a close relationship with Shifeng through this action, in essence, Wu Lingling was the one who owed Soulfire a favor. "You told me to maintain contact with her afterward, so I did exactly that, and I've been exchanging messages with her and offering her guidance all this time," Moonrain said, smiling. Currently, not only has she become a refinement realm expert already, but she is also a bronze member of Azura. "We can totally partner with her. I believe she wouldn't refuse our offer, either." "She's a bronze member in Azura?" Southern Tiger was momentarily stunned. He didn't think that the little girl following Shifeng would improve so rapidly, becoming not only a refinement realm expert but even a bronze member in Azura in such a short time. This was absolutely astonishing. "Should I contact her, Captain?" Moonrain asked. "Of course. Do it quickly before other powers take her away from us," Southern Tiger hurriedly said. Find the original at H*Stead novel. While Azura's member count was skyrocketing, a masked man, who had just arrived in 100 Flow City with a team of 3,000 refinement realm experts, couldn't help but be stunned by the sight before him. "What's going on here?" The masked man blinked his eyes in disbelief as he looked at the crowded teleportation hall. Setting aside how many people were inside 100 Flow City's teleportation hall right now, just the number of refinement realm experts he could sense exceeded 5,000 already. This was even more exaggerated than the situation in Red Obsidian City's teleportation hall. In addition, the total number of flowing water realm experts and void realm experts in the teleportation hall easily exceeded 100. Since when did experts of such caliber become so common? It should be known that 100 Flow City was only a small city compared to the other NPC cities in the miniature ancient world. Yet, the quality of its player population right now was superior to even holy cities. What the masked man found most unbelievable was that these experts originating from various powers were all eagerly initiating conversations with players wearing the Azura Mercenary Alliance's bronze emblem. Meanwhile, every one of these experts sought to either befriend or form teams with these bronze members of Azura. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3097 I'm afraid we'll have trouble taking action, Boss Wolf. Most of these expert teams trying to complete Azura's commissioned quests come from the various powers, and many of them have refinement realm experts among them, a masked girl with a short stature said as she approached a similarly masked man standing at a corner of 100 Flow City's main street. I've also found out why so many experts have gathered here. Azura has seemingly found some items that can allow players to convert their race, and it is currently offering these items up for exchange. Right now, the various powers and independent experts are all trying to earn the contribution points necessary to exchange for these items. I'm afraid we'll have trouble taking action, Boss Wolf. Most of these expert teams trying to complete Azura's commissioned quests come from the various powers, and many of them have refinement realm experts among them, a masked girl with a short stature said as she approached a similarly masked man standing at a corner of 100 Flow City's main street. I've also found out why so many experts have gathered here. Azura has seemingly found some items that can allow players to convert their race, and it is currently offering these items up for exchange. Right now, the various powers and independent experts are all trying to earn the contribution points necessary to exchange for these items. Race conversion items. The masked man was a little stunned by this news. Azura is willing to go as far as to let the various powers freely exchange for such items. Race conversion was normally a very troublesome procedure. Even so, many players sought to convert their race. This was because converting to any other race would mean gaining greater combat power than what they would have as a human player. Normally, if a power were to get its hands on a race conversion item, it would definitely use the item on its own members rather than let outsiders exchange for it. Even the Flower of Seven Sins was no exception. Should we proceed with our plans, Boss Wolf? The masked girl asked. The Flower of Seven Sins might be powerful, but it still wasn't an easy task to go up against the refinement realm experts of numerous powers. I'll report this to Commander Omen and seek her opinion, the masked man said after giving the matter some thought. In the meantime, keep an eye on Azura's bronze members. Understood, the masked girl responded before swiftly disappearing. After the masked girl left, the masked man promptly contacted Death Omen and informed her about the Azura Mercenary Alliance's latest development. It seems Azura has already prepared a countermeasure for us, Big Sis Omen. I'm afraid we'll have to suffer much greater losses than anticipated if we choose to continue with our plan, the masked man said in a low voice. It seems Hidden Soul has found a good backer, Death Omen said, sneering. However, this Azura Mercenary Alliance simply doesn't know what kind of existence it has chosen to provoke. Does that mean we will proceed with the plan, Big Sis Omen? The masked man asked, a hint of excitement appearing in his eyes. Of course. Moreover, we're going to make a big fanfare of it and let everyone know that it is the Flower of Seven Sins' work. Death Omen said with a somewhat frenzied smile. We'll have to let Hidden Soul know how laughable her backer is. I'll start making the preparations right away, the masked man said excitedly. I'll let the various powers understand that it's not in their best interests to accept Azura's quest. Go ahead. Make sure to let Hidden Soul know that all of her efforts are futile and that she will only be harming whichever power she relies on, Death Omen said, nodding before hanging up the call. 2 hours after Death Omen ended her call with her subordinate, an event that shook the various powers occurred in the miniature ancient world. After several years of silence, the Flower of Seven Sins had finally started to take action again. The Flower of Seven Sins had dispatched several thousand refinement realm experts or above this time to disrupt those who had taken on the Azura Mercenary Alliance's quests. Not only did these experts annihilate the expert teams of Zero Wing and Witch's Sin, but they had also decimated over 100 expert teams belonging to the various powers. Everyone knew this was the Flower of Seven Sins doing because of the convict flower left behind on all of the battlefields. The convict flower was a plant the flower of 7 sins nurtured. Members of the organization could only collect the convict flower when they were out doing a quest on the organization's behalf. Meanwhile, after completing their quest, members of the organization were required to leave the convict flower behind to prove they were responsible for completing the quest. However, the flower of 7 sins members typically wouldn't leave a convict flower behind when dealing with normal quests. Typically, they would only do so when taking on high-profile quests. It had already been several years since anyone had seen the convict flower appear. The last time the convict flower appeared was when the flower of 7 sins had assassinated a super guild's great elder. Meanwhile, the person responsible for carrying out the assassination was Death Omen, the current bearer of the title of Pride. Death Omen had instantly risen to fame after completing that assassination, and there was nothing the super guild in question could do to retaliate against her. After all, Death Omen had already reached tier 6 back then. Not to mention, the Flower of 7 Sins was an incredibly mysterious organization. Hence, the Super Guild had no choice but to swallow the loss. Now, the convict flower had bloomed once again. It was also obvious who the convict flower had bloomed for. Indeed, it was for the Azura Mercenary Alliance. Madness. This is madness. Who the heck is targeting the Azura Mercenary Alliance? Whoever it is, they must have paid an astronomical price to get the Flower of 7 Sins to make such a huge move. Could it be world dominators? I doubt world dominators can afford such a price. I heard that the Flower of 7 Sins had dispatched over 6,000 refinement realm experts for the operation this time. That's probably more than half of the refinement realm experts the Flower of 7 Sins has sent to the miniature ancient world. How much would it take to get the Flower of 7 Sins to mobilize so many people? I'm thinking that Azura should have long since known that the Flower of 7 Sins would target it. That would explain why Azura would suddenly offer something as tempting as the lineage crystal up for exchange. Indeed. That's the only way Azura can resist the Flower of 7 Sins. However, after this initial attack conducted by the Flower of 7 Sins, the various powers and independent experts will probably start to weigh their options, since continuing to take on Azura's quests would mean going against the Flower of 7 Sins. The Flower of 7 Sins has never failed a job before. I guess Azura's good days are coming to an end. Even if the Mercenary Alliance doesn't face destruction, it will have no choice but to hide in Abyssal Star City. For a time, the miniature ancient world's various powers and independent players fervently discussed the matter of the Flower of 7 Sins targeting the Azura Mercenary Alliance. The scale of the Flower of 7 Sins operation this time ranked among the top out of all the operations it had carried out in the past. After all, the Flower of 7 Sins had mobilized over 6,000 refinement realm experts against the Azura Mercenary Alliance. Some of the weaker super guilds might not even have this many refinement realm experts in the miniature ancient world. In other words, the Flower of 7 Sins had mobilized a super guild's worth of refinement realm experts against the Azura Mercenary Alliance. The Azura Mercenary Alliance might have the Abyssal Star Primordial City serving as its foundation, but even an existence as powerful as Azura would probably be helpless against so many refinement realm experts. Abyssal Star City, Azura Mercenary Alliance's headquarters. Currently, 4 people sat inside the spacious conference room of the headquarters building. They were Hidden Soul, Liu Wusheng, Frenzied Smile, and Shifeng. Apart from Shifeng, the others in the room all wore gloomy expressions. "Everyone, report your situations," Shifeng suddenly said. "According to Azura's statistics, we have suffered over 20,000 casualties thus far. Of them, over 5,000 are refinement realm experts," Hidden Soul said, gritting her teeth. Although these members have not uttered any complaints about their deaths, their willingness to continue taking on commissions is very low. It's not just low. Nobody is even willing to apply to join Azura right now. On the other hand, the number of people applying to withdraw from the alliance has increased significantly, Liu Wusheng said, shaking his head. The scale of the Flower of 7 Sins operation this time is simply too large. The difference in strength between both sides is also obvious. Moreover, in the case of partnered guilds like us, the Flower of 7 Sins is even targeting members who aren't taking on the alliance's commissions. I'm afraid we'll have to limit our operations to just Abyssal Star City and its surroundings. We cannot continue operations in the various NPC cities. Hidden Soul's expression grew even darker when she heard Liu Wusheng's words. The scale of the Flower of Seven Sins mobilization this time had thoroughly exceeded their expectations. The organization had mobilized at least 70% of its manpower in the miniature ancient world against the Azura Mercenary Alliance. The scale of this operation was so absurd that Hidden Soul couldn't help but wonder if the Flower of Seven Sins had gone crazy. What about the Flower of Seven Sins losses? Shifeng asked. The Flower of Seven Sins losses? Frenzied Smile revealed a bitter smile when he heard Shifeng's question. The Flower of Seven Sins has made ample preparations this time. According to my insider information, they've suffered only a little over 1,000 casualties. Compared to the Azura Mercenary Alliance's losses, the Flower of Seven Sins' losses was nothing. Only 1,000? It seems the Flower of Seven Sins has made quite a profit this time, Shifeng calmly stated. Since the Flower of Seven Sins is willing to splurge to such an extent, we'll play along with it. Send a notice to everyone in the Alliance. From now on, we will be awarding 10,000 contribution points to all common mount commissions. Rewards for bronze and mysterious iron mount commissions will similarly be increased by 5 times. Let's see which one of us will last longer. So long as the reward was sufficient, there would always be brave people willing to take the risk. This was also the tactic the Greater God's Domain's various hegemonic powers had used to deal with him and Zero Wing during his previous life. Both he and Zero Wing had suffered a lot because of this tactic. Now, Shifeng didn't mind letting the Flower of Seven Sins have a taste of this tactic as well. 5 times. Hidden Soul couldn't help but look at Shifeng as if he had gone crazy. Guild leader Black Flame, we'll run out of lineage crystals in no time if you do that. It only cost 1 million contribution points to exchange for a lineage crystal. However, the various expert teams weren't just obtaining 1 common mount a day. If an expert team was lucky, it was even possible for them to acquire 10 mounts or more. That would mean a daily income of over 100,000 contribution points per expert team. If an expert team got lucky and acquired 2 or 3 bronze mounts, which would be worth 50,000 contribution points after the reward increase, on top of the common mounts, it would earn 2 to 300,000 contribution points per day. It should be known that this was only one expert team. What if there were 50 or 60 of such expert teams? In that case, Azura would be paying out over 15 million contribution points per day. Moreover, that was before accounting for the other quests Azura offered. At this rate, Azura would probably run out of lineage crystals before mainstream players could reach level 115 and start making use of Abyssal Star City. At that time, Azura would no longer have any means of resisting the Flower of Seven Sins. Aside from that, I have another announcement to make. Azura will also place a bounty on the Flower of Seven Sins members from today onward. Refinement Realm Experts will be worth 300 points, Flowing Water Realm Experts will be worth 1,000 points, Void Realm Experts will be worth 3,000 points, and Domain Realm Experts will be worth 10,000 points. We need to make the Flower of Seven Sins know that there is a price to pay for targeting us. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3098 _ Silence enveloped the conference room after Shifeng finished speaking. Silence enveloped the conference room after Shifeng finished speaking. Of the 3 other people in the room, Hidden Soul and Frenzied Smile looked at Shifeng in shock and surprise, while Liu Wusheng looked at Shifeng with unprecedented joy. Guild leader Black Flame, if you really go through with this, the Azura Mercenary Alliance will be forming a never-ending grudge with the Flower of Seven Sins, Frenzied Smile reminded Shifeng in a low voice. It was true that the Flower of Seven Sins targeting the Azura Mercenary Alliance's quest takers had affected the Mercenary Alliance's reputation and development to a significant extent. However, this was merely the Flower of Seven Sins warning and putting on a show of force for the Azura Mercenary Alliance. If Azura was willing to give up on Hidden Soul and the other former members of the Flower of Seven Sins, the Flower of Seven Sins would most likely stop its actions against Azura. After all, Sending such a large number of experts against Azura was a significant expenditure even for the Flower of Seven Sins. Once the Flower of Seven Sins achieved its goal, there'd be no point continuing this expensive farce. However, if Azura publicly placed a bounty on the Flower of Seven Sins, it would signal the start of an all-out war between Azura and the Flower of Seven Sins. Apart from the 5 great superguilds, no other power had ever dared to openly place a bounty on the Flower of Seven Sins thus far. Setting aside the futility of putting a bounty on such a secretive organization, putting a bounty on the Flower of Seven Sins was essentially an act of provocation. Meanwhile, no sane person would want to provoke a transcendental power like the Flower of Seven Sins. If Azura truly dared to place a bounty on the Flower of Seven Sins, it wouldn't matter even if Hidden Soul left the Mercenary Alliance later. The Flower of Seven Sins still wouldn't spare the Mercenary Alliance. What of it? Shifeng's voice suddenly turned cold. The grudge between us has already been formed the moment the Flower of Seven Sins decided to act against us. Shifeng had never harbored any good feelings toward assassination organizations like the Flower of Seven Sins. He would have turned a blind eye to the Flower of Seven Sins' existence had it stayed out of his business. However, now that the Flower of Seven Sins was openly challenging him, he wouldn't mind giving it a fight. So what if the Flower of Seven Sins was a transcendental power? It was only powerful in this subworld. He had clashed against many powers that were dozens of times stronger than the Flower of Seven Sins in the past. Compared to those powers, the Flower of Seven Sins was nothing. The current Zero Wing might be incredibly weak, and the Azura Mercenary Alliance he had established was just starting to take shape, but that didn't mean he would just allow the Flower of Seven Sins to push him around. Not to mention, he had already gained access to the stratified abyssal realm. If they were competing solely in terms of resources, the Azura Mercenary Alliance was in no way inferior to the Flower of Seven Sins. Hidden Soul felt touched and guilty when she heard Shifeng's words. Originally, Shifeng had tasked her with establishing the Azura Mercenary Alliance so that the Mercenary Alliance could be of service to Zero Wing. Yet, now, not only did the Mercenary Alliance offer hardly any help to Zero Wing, but it had even ended up offending the Flower of Seven Sins because of her, which had, in turn, caused Zero Wing to suffer significant losses. Carry out the changes. It's about time we let the Flower of Seven Sins know the consequence of provoking the Azura Mercenary Alliance, Shifeng said firmly. Afterward, everyone present followed Shifeng's instructions and informed everyone in the Azura Mercenary Alliance of the changes to the quest rewards. A 500% increase? Azura is amazing. We can earn 10,000 contribution points from just one common mount and 50,000 contribution points from a bronze mount. If we're lucky, we can get our hands on a lineage crystal in only 4 or 5 days. With this, even the various superpowers Apex experts will probably be tempted to move. The increase to quest rewards is nothing. Have you guys not seen the bounty? This is an open bounty placed on the Flower of Seven Sins. The Flower of Seven Sins will probably go crazy once it learns about this bounty. The Flower of Seven Sins and Azura are definitely becoming mortal enemies now. Unlike past bounties on the Flower of Seven Sins, Azura's bounty is too tempting to resist. It's also much easier to find the Flower of Seven Sins members now since they're actively attacking those taking on Azura's quests. Azura is paying 300 points per refinement realm expert, and the Flower of Seven Sins members typically move in 100-man teams. If we make ample preparations, that's an easy 30,000 contribution points. That's even more profitable than hunting for mounts. Shortly after the Azura Mercenary Alliance's announcement, an uproar erupted among the Mercenary Alliance's members. It was especially true for the various powers expert teams considering withdrawing from the Alliance. Now, none of them thought of withdrawing from the Alliance. The Flower of Seven Sins assassins might be very scary, but the rewards the Azura Mercenary Alliance offered were simply too much to resist. After all, not even the various superpowers offered the opportunity to exchange for a fragmented legendary item in just 4 or 5 days. It might be difficult to beat the Flower of Seven Sins experts, but if they prepared some special tools and magic scrolls, it was entirely possible for them to turn the tables on those experts. Not to mention, it didn't really matter even if they couldn't complete their mount quests, since they could similarly earn a significant amount of contribution points so long as they killed the Flower of Seven Sins Refinement Realm experts. Less than half a day after the Azura Mercenary Alliance announced the changes to its quest rewards, Hidden Soul hurriedly ran to the guild leader's office in Zero Wing's residence. "You've really blown things out of proportion this time, guild leader Black Flame. 6 lineage crystals have already been redeemed in just half a day. The various major powers expert teams are moving in full force. Even the various superpowers experts have taken action. At this rate, we will have to give away at least a dozen lineage crystal a day, and we'll probably run out of lineage crystals in half a month," Hidden Soul said, not knowing whether to laugh or cry about this situation. The Flower of Seven Sins is mostly just sitting aside and observing the situation right now. By the looks of it, they plan to only go all out once we run out of lineage crystals. Hidden Soul had to admit that the rewards Shifeng offered were indeed effective in getting the various powers to move for Azura. In just half a day, the Flower of Seven Sins plan to target Azura had become a joke. According to the insider information she received, the Flower of Seven Sins had even lost over 2,000 refinement realm experts. This was a significant loss, and even the Flower of Seven Sins wouldn't be able to take it if it suffered such losses every day. This was why the Flower of Seven Sins had become warier in letting its experts take action. Of course, to ensure that Azura maintained its high quest rewards, the Flower of Seven Sins would still have some of its members attack Azura's quest takers. The Flower of Seven Sins had even increased the rewards of its assassination quests to tempt some of its stronger members to take action. Simply put, the Flower of Seven Sins was biding its time. Once Azura ran out of lineage crystals, the various powers experts would naturally stop behaving so crazily. At that time, it would be the end for the Azura Mercenary Alliance. "I'm afraid we will have to disappoint them. They will probably never see such a day arrive," Shifeng said, chuckling. Then, he took out a dark gold crystal from his bag, handed it to Hidden Soul, and said, "Take this advanced lineage crystal. Consider it an advance payment for what I need you to do next. Follow the instructions in the item description and absorb the crystal. Then, I'll need you to follow me somewhere." The stratified abyssal realm was a gathering place for the many worlds of God's domain. Many powerful native players also inhabited it. So, it wasn't exaggerated to say that the place was infested with experts. It was on an entirely different level compared to the miniature ancient world. Likewise, the stratified abyssal realm also possessed bountiful resources. Moreover, every stratified abyssal realm had its own local specialties that could be sold for astronomical prices even in the greater God's domain. So long as he could form a stable trade route with the stratified abyssal realm, Zero Wing would have no trouble asserting dominance over the various powers in the Boundary Mountain range. At that time, even the 5 great superguilds would have a much bigger headache dealing with Zero Wing. However, if Shifeng wanted to establish a foothold in the stratified abyssal realm, he couldn't do it by himself. He also needed third-floor experts like Hidden Soul. This novel is hosted by H0stead N0V3L. However, not just any third-floor expert would do. After all, this was the stratified abyssal realm they were talking about. Only a third-floor expert who had converted to a higher life form could be considered a truly powerful expert in the stratified abyssal realm. An advanced lineage crystal? Hidden Soul was greatly shocked when she looked at the dark gold crystal in her hand. The normal lineage crystal was already plenty amazing of an item. She didn't think there'd be an even better version of it available. This situation led her to wonder how much more strength Zero Wing had kept hidden. "We have limited time. Quickly go to the primordial tower and absorb the crystal. Whatever higher life form you manage to convert to will depend on your personal abilities," Shifeng said, chuckling. Currently, he only had 5 advanced lineage crystals on hand. Originally, he had planned to let Su Qianliu and the other executives of Zero Wing use these crystals. However, he quickly abandoned this idea. Advanced lineage crystals were different from the normal lineage crystals. The greater the control a player had over their body, the better the results they could yield from the advanced lineage crystal. Su Qianliu and the others might have grown a lot recently, but they were still far from having the ability to make full use of the advanced lineage crystal. Meanwhile, each player could only use one advanced lineage crystal in their life. So, it'd be a huge waste to let Su Qianliu and the others use an advanced lineage crystal now. Hidden Soul nodded to Shifeng's urging. She understood that Shifeng must have something very important he needed her help with. Without hesitation, she promptly left for the primordial tower with the advanced lineage crystal in hand. Meanwhile, after seeing Hidden Soul leave, Shifeng carefully retrieved a dark crystal from his bag. This crystal was none other than the primal lineage crystal he had obtained from the Dark Titan. I wanted to wait a little longer before using it, but I have no other choice if I want to have an easier time in the stratified abyssal realm. After pondering for a moment, Shifeng took out the 10,000 mana stones he had prepared beforehand and activated the primal lineage crystal. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3099 _ The lineage crystal was different from your average race conversion quests. The race's players could convert to using the lineage crystal wasn't fixed. Instead, the lineage crystal would provide players with a list of optimal races after scanning their current abilities and potential. Meanwhile, the lineage crystal identified players' potential through the degree of control they could exert over their bodies. The lineage crystal was different from your average race conversion quests. The race's players could convert to using the lineage crystal wasn't fixed. Instead, the lineage crystal would provide players with a list of optimal races after scanning their current abilities and potential. Meanwhile, the lineage crystal identified players' potential through the degree of control they could exert over their bodies. A player's potential was especially important when using an advanced lineage crystal. Any expert beneath the domain realm would only get to choose from the most common higher life forms. In such cases, players would only have slightly stronger physique and basic attributes than players who had used a normal lineage crystal. Players could only utilize an advanced lineage crystal to its full potential after reaching the domain realm. At that time, they'd have a chance of converting into powerful higher life forms such as demidragons and high elves and gaining strength that would allow them to look down on others of the same tier. They'd gain strength rivaling archaic species of the same tier. Meanwhile, the requirements to use a primal lineage crystal were even higher. Not only did players have to reach the domain realm, but they'd also need to have considerable achievements in the realms of truth. At the very least, anyone thinking of using a primal lineage crystal should be at the transcendental realm, the third level of the realms of truth, to make full use of the primal lineage crystal. Fortunately, Shifeng had already mastered the transcendental realm. After Shifeng completed the dozen or so instructions listed on the primal lineage crystal's description, 3 options appeared before him. The first option was a dragonoid. If he chose this option, he would gain a 3-meter-tall body with a tail and arms covered in scales. Dragonoids were different from demidragons. They were one of the primal life forms in God's domain. They were the result of dragons abandoning their draconic form and taking on human-like bodies. While dragonoids might not have the powerful bodies of dragons, they retained the dragon race's talent for magic. The second option was an ancient elf. If he chose this option, he'd have a 2-meter-tall body that was covered in magic runes. Ancient elves possessed mana affinity far beyond that of elves. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that they were mana itself, and they could effortlessly master super-ancient spells that modern elves could not. When Shifeng saw the third option, he couldn't help but be stunned. The sample image of the third option showed no changes to his current appearance. If he had to get into the specifics and point out a difference, it'd be his eyes. At first glance, his eyes in the image looked no different than his current eyes. However, when he took a closer look, he noticed tiny specks of starlight scattered across his eyes. When Shifeng saw this image, a name quickly popped into his mind. Ancient human. Also known as a primal human, ancient humans were humans that had existed since the birth of God's domain. However, unlike modern humans, ancient humans possessed the eyes of reality that could see through all things. In reality, The identification skills that exist in the current God's domain were merely skills created to imitate the eyes of reality of ancient humans. Even the war god's temple's eyes of truth was no exception. Meanwhile, the reason these imitations were created was due to the decline of ancient humans. God's domain's environment had continuously declined as time passed, the mana available in the environment growing thinner and thinner. Because of this changing environment, the quality of ancient humans also continuously degraded generation after generation until they eventually became the humans of today. Aside from the eyes of truth, ancient humans also possessed physical qualities far superior to modern humans. The environment available in the early days of God's domain was brimming with mana. During that era, ancient humans had yet to make major advancements in any aspect. Yet, despite this situation, ancient humans still managed to survive in a world infested with ferocious beasts. That was because ancient humans possessed physical qualities that allowed them to trade blows with ferocious beasts. Among modern humans, the only existences that could rival ancient humans were probably heroes. Meanwhile, heroes were existences who had been blessed by gods and possessed the strength to fight against dragons. Becoming a dragonoid or an ancient elf might provide me with stronger physical qualities, but the appearances of these two races aren't suitable for the current God's domain. Moreover, both races tend toward magical classes. So, it seems becoming an ancient human is my only choice. After pondering over the three races for some time, Shifeng eventually settled on the third option, ancient human. Both dragonoids and ancient elves were races extremely proficient in magic. However, Shifeng was a swordsman. While being good at manipulating mana might give him an easier time ascending to higher tiers, a pair of eyes capable of seeing through everything was much more useful for a swordsman. After Shifeng chose to become an ancient human, the mana stones he prepared promptly transformed into a huge stream of mana that flowed into his body, the mana continuously strengthening and altering his body. Meanwhile, this process continued for over an hour before ending. So, this is an ancient human? When Shifeng opened his eyes and looked at the world around him, an indescribable sense of shock and joy filled him. Setting aside his physical body that rivaled archaic species of the same tier, just the ability of his eyes to see how mana operated was already more than enough to cause any magical class expert to lose their minds. Normally, even perceiving mana was already an incredibly difficult feat. This was because mana typically couldn't be seen with the naked eye. Seeing mist-like mana didn't constitute seeing mana, either. This was because players couldn't actually see how mana operated just by looking at its physical manifestation. They could only do so by feeling it with their various senses. However, Shifeng could currently see all of these things visually. Although the colors were faint and translucent, he could see all of the conversions taking place around him with perfect clarity. He could even see the mana the mundane objects around him radiated. The ability to see the conversion of mana taking place around him was more than enough to elevate his combat standard to a whole new level. With this ability alone, he could find the best entry point in the mana around him to execute his skills, spells, or combat techniques, improving their raw power. He could also observe the change in his opponent's flow of mana to determine their movements. This would be much more effective than observing the changes in his opponent's muscles. In God's domain, players had to move their physical bodies as they did with their bodies in the real world. It meant that players had to move several muscles in a series to execute a movement. While this process typically happened in the blink of an eye, it was still a process that involved several steps, and variables could occur at any of these steps. So, predicting a player's movements through observing their muscles wasn't 100% reliable. However, it was a different story for mana. Players only needed one thought to execute an adjustment to their mana. If players decided to execute an action with their mana, the changes would reflect on their mana immediately. This meant that the changes they decided to make would also immediately become apparent to Shifeng. While this still wasn't enough to tell him exactly what kind of action his opponent was planning to make, it could still let him make better predictions. After spending some time getting used to his new body and talents, Shifeng quickly contacted Su Qianliu, Blackie, Firecloud, Happy Snow, and Rampant Blade, having them gather at his office. Aside from those five, Shifeng also called Hidden Soul, Gentle Snow, and Lin Yaoyu over to his office under the excuse of doing a quest for Zero Wing. Zero Wing might have 9 entry slots for the stratified abyssal realm, but he'd only be bringing baggage if he brought that lacked strength. Shifeng's goal was to establish a foothold in the stratified abyssal realm so that Zero Wing could conduct long-term trade with a native power. That way, not only could he shrug off the losses he suffered from clashing with the Flower of Seven Sins, but he could also elevate Zero Wing and Azura into the hegemons of the miniature ancient world. After all, the resources available in the stratified abyssal realm were far beyond what was available in an isolated god's domain. So long as he partnered with a relatively strong native power in the stratified abyssal realm, acquiring items such as the lineage crystal in large quantities wasn't difficult. However, the precondition to partnering with a native power was to have sufficient money and strength. Find the original at H*stead novel. Meanwhile, the 8 people Shifeng had chosen were the best candidates he could think of. There was no need to worry about Zero Wing's management, either. Su Qianliu and the others could still manage the guild's affairs via offline means. As for the Azura Mercenary Alliance, Shifeng had left its management to Liu Wusheng and Frenzied Smile. Both of them were veterans when it came to managing large organizations. So long as there were enough lineage crystals, they should have no problems managing the Mercenary Alliance. After Su Qianliu and the others gathered in Shifeng's office, they couldn't help but be surprised when they saw that Hidden Soul had changed into a demonkin. As for Shifeng's changes, nobody present noticed a thing. Even after everyone had gathered, Shifeng briefly told them that they'd be heading to the stratified abyssal realm, which was outside their god's domain, and had all 8 of them sign a confidentiality agreement. Then, he had everyone teleport to the Dragonfall secret land. This situation excited Su Qianliu and the others. They didn't think they'd have a chance to travel outside their god's domain. Lin Yaoyu was particularly excited by this situation. As a first-rate guild's executive member, she knew that this was an incredibly rare opportunity even for Tier 5 experts. Yet, Zero Wing did not hesitate to give an outer member like herself this opportunity. This situation caused her to further elevate her evaluation of Zero Wing. Before teleporting to the secret land himself, Shifeng had retrieved the 2 million magic crystals stored in Zero Wing's warehouse to use as trade currency. Then, after spending some time traveling through the Ceiling Labyrinth with his team, they arrived at the Ceiling Labyrinth's 5th-floor hall within the time he had agreed on with the Tower Alliance and 100 Flower Palace. When Shifeng's team arrived, the Tower Alliance's and 100 Flower Palace's members had long since been waiting for them. Evidently, the two sides were much more eager to enter the stratified abyssal realm than Shifeng. Since everyone's here, let's begin, Bloodhammer said eagerly after glancing at Shifeng's team. Okay, let's begin, Crimson Heart nodded, a hint of anticipation in her eyes. Subsequently, Bloodhammer and Crimson Heart each took out one half of a key and began chanting an incantation hidden in their respective halves. Then, once the two were done chanting, a divine light enveloped everyone present and dragged them into the gate of crossing. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,